My daughter looked me straight in the eye and said I'd die alone if I didn't pay for her luxury wedding. Her fiancé called it an investment in our happiness. That was the moment I knew I had to take back control. Hi everyone, my name's Ruth Calder. Before I tell you what really happened that day on the beach, let me ask, where are you watching from? The comments always amaze me, stories of mothers, daughters, heartbreak from every corner of the world. Maybe you've been where I was standing at the edge of something beautiful, only to realize it was about to break. Now let me take you back to the morning that changed everything. The air smelled like salt and champagne. Seagulls wheeled above a stretch of white tents and golden chairs lined up neatly in the sand. The wedding planner scurried back and forth, waving clipboards like battle flags. I stood there in my pale blue dress, clutching a bouquet of white roses that weren't mine, watching the waves roll in and out, constant calm, indifferent. Emily's wedding day. My only daughter. My entire world. For 28 years, every heartbeat in me had been tied to hers. From the moment I held her red, furious, beautiful, I'd sworn to protect her from every cruelty this world could offer. I kept that promise for nearly 3 decades. I didn't realize she'd become the one to test it. But that morning, all I felt was love and pride, and maybe a little ache in my knees from walking across uneven sand in heels that were far too optimistic for my age. "Mrs. Calder," a voice called the photographer, a young man in linen, motioning me toward the bridal suite. "They're ready for you." I smiled, waved, and began my slow walk across the beach, the breeze tangled in my hair, carrying whispers of old songs from the speakers. Everything looked perfect, exactly the kind of fairy tale Emily always dreamed of, the kind I could never give her growing up. I raised Emily alone after her father left when she was 9. He'd fallen in love with someone younger, moved across the country, sent postcards for a few years, and stopped. I worked 2 jobs teaching at the community college during the day, managing a bookstore at night. There were months when I ate soup from a can so she could have ballet shoes or new art supplies. But Emily never knew the full story. I made sure of that. I wanted her to believe life could still be beautiful even when it was bruising. When she met Jason 2 years ago, she glowed. I remember her first phone call. "Mom, he's amazing, smart, ambitious. He says he's never met anyone like me." I wanted to believe him too. When I finally met him, he was charming, the kind of man who looked you in the eye but kept one foot already pointed toward the exit. I noticed things, how he talked over her, how he called the waiter buddy without looking at him. But I stayed quiet. I told myself maybe I was just being protective. That morning, as I reached the suite, I paused outside the door. Laughter spilled out, champagne-fueled, high-pitched, rehearsed. I heard Emily's voice among her bridesmaids, lighter than I'd heard in months. For a second, I thought maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe love had softened her again. I knocked gently. "It's me," I said. The laughter stopped. The door opened. There she was, my girl, my Emily. Blonde hair swept up in soft curls, ocean blue eyes rimmed with gold shimmer, the same color she used to paint seashells with when she was little. She was breathtaking. "Mom," she said flatly, not warmly, not coldly, just neutral, as though I were a distant cousin arriving late. "You look beautiful," I managed. "Absolutely stunning." She gave a small nod, glancing at her reflection instead of me. "Thanks. Everything okay out there?" "Yes, dear. Everything's perfect." She smiled a tiny, polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good. It needs to be." I hovered awkwardly, wanting to hug her but sensing a barrier. I looked around the room, makeup brushes, perfume bottles, silk robes embroidered with bride tribe. Everything gleamed, everything expensive. I wondered if she'd ever known how much I'd given up to pay for even half of this. Then the door opened again, and Jason stepped in tan, tailored, confident. He kissed Emily on the cheek like they were posing for a magazine cover, then glanced at me with a smile too smooth to be sincere. "Mrs. Calder," he said warmly, "you made it. You look radiant." I smiled politely, though his tone carried something rehearsed, too polite, too performative. "Thank you, Jason. Big day." "The biggest," he replied, slipping his arm around Emily's waist. "We're about to make history." I laughed softly. "History?" He winked. "You'll see." That word lingered with me. "You'll see." I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. As they turned back to the mirror, I caught a glimpse of Emily's expression, proud, distant, and strangely expectant, like she was waiting for something to happen, like I wasn't her mother anymore, but a guest whose purpose was about to be tested. I told myself it was nerves. I told myself she'd come back to me once the vows were said, once the music faded, once the champagne bubbles burst. But the ocean knows better than we do. It always warns you before the storm, and somewhere deep in my chest, I could already feel the tide turning. The bridal suite emptied just before noon. Bridesmaids fluttered out like bright birds, carrying champagne flutes and lip gloss, leaving behind a heavy perfume of roses and nerves. The ocean outside shimmered calm as glass, but the air inside felt tight like the moment before thunder. Emily stood at the window, staring at the rows of white chairs facing the sea. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Exactly how I imagined." I smiled, adjusting the strap of my handbag. "You deserve it, sweetheart." She turned then, her face unreadable. "You really think so?" "Of course," I said, "every bit of it." She nodded, then glanced toward the door. "Good. Jason wants to talk to you before the ceremony. Just be nice, okay?" I frowned. "Be nice? Why wouldn't I be?" She sighed. "Just don't make it awkward. He's under a lot of pressure." Before I could answer, the door opened and in walked Jason. Crisp white linen shirt, half buttoned, confidence radiating off him like too much cologne. He carried a champagne flute in one hand and his phone in the other. "Ladies," he greeted, flashing that perfect hollow smile. "Mind if I steal your mom for a minute, babe?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Just keep it short." He closed the door behind her and turned to me, all warmth and charm. "You look lovely, Mrs. Calder. Blue suits you." I forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Jason. Is everything all right?" "Oh, everything's fantastic." He set the glass down on the vanity, leaned back, and exhaled like a man about to deliver a business pitch. "Listen, I wanted to talk about the reception. Tiny adjustment, nothing major." I folded my hands. "What kind of adjustment?" "Well," he smiled wider. "Emily and I were talking. We realized that if we're going to do this right, really start our life together, it should reflect our vision. You know, the kind of wedding people remember." I laughed lightly. "People will remember it just fine, Jason. You've done a beautiful job." "Oh, absolutely. But imagine this a luxury yacht reception after the ceremony. Sunset cruise, champagne tower, live band. We found one available last minute. It's perfect, but..." He paused, pretending to look regretful. "It's a little over budget." I blinked. "Over budget by how much?" He met my eyes. 50,000. The words landed like a slap. "Excuse me?" He gave an easy chuckle, as though I'd misheard. 50 grand. Nothing crazy in the grand scheme, right? It's not like you can put a price on happiness." I stared at him. "Jason, I've already contributed more than I could afford. The venue, the catering." "Which we appreciate," he interrupted smoothly. "Truly. But this would be the finishing touch. A symbolic gesture of your support. Like an investment in our future." My stomach turned. "An investment?" He nodded, smiling like a salesman closing a deal. "You help us pull this off, and we promise you'll always be part of our lives. You'll have family dinners, grandkids visiting, all that good stuff." The way he said it, promise, made my blood run cold. "Jason," I said quietly, "are you threatening me?" He laughed again, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course not. I'm offering an opportunity, but if you're not interested, that's your choice." The door opened suddenly, and Emily stepped back in. Her voice was light, but her eyes were sharp. "Did you ask her?" Jason smiled at her like a conspirator. "I did." Emily crossed her arms. "So? What did she say?" "I haven't said anything," I murmured. She turned to me, her voice lowering into something rehearsed. "Mom, this wedding is the most important day of my life. Jason and I have worked so hard for it. You can help make it perfect. You should want to." "I do want to," I said softly, "but not like this." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You've always said you'd do anything for me." "Yes," I whispered. "Anything within love, not manipulation." Jason smirked. "Call it whatever you want. But let's be clear, we're talking about 50,000, not 50 million. It's a small thing compared to what you'll gain." "What I'll gain," I repeated. Emily's voice was cold now. "A relationship with us. Otherwise," she shrugged, "maybe it's best we go our separate ways. We can start our life without the guilt of your limitations." I felt my knees weaken. "Emily," she didn't flinch. "You either support us or you don't. If not, that's fine. But don't expect calls on holidays or visits or..." She hesitated. eyes flicking to Jason. Anyone to take care of you when you're old. The words hit harder than any slap. For a moment, all I could hear was the ocean outside, relentless and calm. Jason added quietly, "Give us 50,000 or disappear forever." There it was, clean, merciless, final. Emily smirked, tilting her head. Or, enjoy a nursing home alone. Something inside me, something soft, motherly, forgiving, cracked clean down the middle. I looked at her, at both of them, and realized the daughter I'd raised had turned into someone I no longer recognized. So I did the only thing I could. I picked up the champagne glass on the vanity, lifted it slowly, and took a sip. The bubbles burned my throat, bitter and bright. Then I looked at them both and whispered, just loud enough for them to hear, "You missed one detail." Emily frowned. "What?" I smiled. "You'll find out soon enough." The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Jason's smile faltered. Emily looked confused, not frightened. Not yet, but something in my voice made her pause. I set the glass down carefully. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said softly, "I think I'll go take my seat." And I walked out, calm, steady, the sea wind catching the hem of my dress, leaving behind the daughter who just threatened to abandon me for a price tag. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The waves shimmered like molten gold, and in their reflection, I saw a woman I hadn't recognized in years, quiet, determined, and finally awake. I didn't cry right away. I thought I would. I thought I'd fall apart the moment I stepped outside that suite, but I didn't. Instead, I walked straight past the laughter and the flowers and the soft string quartet warming up by the dunes. I smiled at the guests who passed, nodded at the wedding planner, and kept walking until I reached the edge of the beach, where the sand gave way to a stretch of dark, wet stone. There, with my shoes sinking into the cool grit, I finally exhaled. The ocean roared in front of me, endless and wild, and I realized it had been years since I'd stood alone with it, years since I'd allowed silence to speak louder than anyone's expectations. $50,000. My daughter's love weighed and priced like a diamond on display. I remember whispering to myself, "This can't be her. This can't be Emily." But it was. I thought of all the nights I'd sat by her bedside when she was little reading The Secret Garden and Anne of Green Gables until we both drifted off, her hand tangled in mine. I thought of her 12th birthday, when I couldn't afford the art set she wanted, so I made one from thrift store finds, painting each brush handle gold. She cried when she opened it, not because it wasn't new, but because I'd tried so hard. What happened to that girl? Where did she go? I wanted to blame Jason, that charming parasite, but deep down I knew the truth. I had raised Emily to believe love meant giving everything, and she'd learned that lesson too well. Only she'd flipped it. She thought love meant taking everything, and I had let her. I returned to my hotel room, slipped off my shoes, and sat on the bed, staring at the phone. The walls were painted a soft coral, sunlight bleeding through gauzy curtains. Everything felt too bright, too kind for what was sitting inside my chest. For a long while, I just sat there, replaying their words. "Give us 50,000 or disappear forever." Or enjoy a nursing home alone. There was something so cold in the way Emily said it, not cruel, but practiced. Like she'd convinced herself it was logical, efficient, necessary. That's what broke me most. Not the insult, but the calculation. I had spent my life believing love was a language you learned through giving. But that day, I realized it's also one you can unlearn through neglect. I made tea, though I didn't drink it. The kettle whistled. The cup sat untouched. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. My savings, modest but steady, enough for my own small home, for comfort in old age, for the quiet I'd earned. I had already given Emily more than she knew: the down payment for her apartment, the small inheritance her grandmother left, the trust account I'd kept in both our names since she was 16. I had called it the safety net. Now I wondered who it had really been protecting. The phone buzzed a message from Linda, my oldest friend. "How's the bride? You holding up, Ruth?" I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "I'm fine. The tide's coming in." She replied with a heart emoji and a joke about sunscreen, blissfully unaware of what had just cracked open beneath the perfect wedding canopy. I smiled sadly. Linda had always been the one to anchor me, blunt, loyal, the kind of friend who shows up with soup when you don't ask. but this was something I couldn't explain yet, not until I understood it myself. I walked out onto the balcony, the sea breeze whipping strands of hair into my face. Below, I could see the ceremony set up, glowing gold under the afternoon sun. Guests milled about, taking pictures, laughing, and there she was, Emily, radiant in her gown, posing with Jason by the archway, looking every bit the storybook bride. No one could see the cracks. No one ever does. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix things. I didn't text her. I didn't chase her down to talk, to plead, to make her understand. Instead, I stood there, letting the salt air sting my eyes and the truth settle deep inside me. I had nothing left to give her except a lesson she would never forget. I sat down at the desk, pulled out a notepad and began to write. My handwriting shook, but my thoughts were clear. First, a list. Every account, every shared signature, every property and policy that still had her name attached. Then another. People who needed to know my lawyer, the bank, the property manager. One by one, I drew lines through them. One by one, I began to take myself back. It wasn't revenge I felt, it was reclamation. A slow, quiet gathering of the pieces I'd scattered over decades of sacrifice. By the time the sun began to sink, I felt oddly calm. I slipped on a shawl, poured myself a glass of the hotel's cheap white wine, and sat by the window. Outside, the sea glowed orange, restless and endless. The same sea I'd shown Emily as a child, telling her, the ocean gives, but it also takes. Back then, she'd asked, how does it know when to take, Mama? I'd smiled and said, when someone forgets what they've been given. Now, I finally understood my own answer. The doorbell rang, a soft knock from the wedding planner, probably checking on me. I ignored it. I needed silence. I needed the sound of the waves, the reminder that everything, even heartbreak, was part of the tide. And in that fading light, with the sound of the surf echoing against the glass, I whispered to myself, this isn't the end, it's the beginning. By the time the ceremony began, I had sewn my face back into a smile. The kind of smile that looks soft and proud from a distance, but up close is made of glass. The guests gathered in rows facing the sea, sunlight spilling across their white clothes. A quartet played softly, something classical, though the wind kept stealing the melody away. The smell of salt, sunscreen, and money lingered in the air. I took my seat in the second row. Emily had made sure of that. Front row is for the bridal party, she'd said, when we discussed the seating chart. At the time, I thought it was logistics. Now I understood. It was distance. Even on her wedding day, she wanted space between us. Linda slipped into the seat beside me, her hat slightly askew, her grin as wide as ever. Ruth, there you are. I was starting to think you'd run off with the officiant. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Just needed a moment to breathe. She squeezed my hand. You okay, really? I nodded. I'm fine, love. Just letting the tide come in. Her brows knitted. That's an odd thing to say. Maybe, I said, still smiling. But it makes sense to me. The music swelled as the bridal party appeared at the top of the dune path, silk dresses fluttering, petals caught in the wind. Then Emily emerged, radiant and glacial, her veil trailing behind her like sea foam. The crowd sighed collectively, and for a moment, even I forgot the sting of her words. She was my baby, my miracle, and despite everything, my heart still swelled when I saw her. But then I saw Jason, waiting at the altar, hands folded, eyes gleaming like a man who'd already won. That's when the warmth in my chest cooled again. He turned as Emily approached, and I noticed the small exchange of looks between them, that unspoken alliance of people who think they've outsmarted everyone else. I took a slow breath and straightened in my seat. My plan had already begun. That morning, after my tea went cold, I'd made 3 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, Richard. I'd told him to finalize the removal of Emily's name from our joint account, something I'd considered before but never followed through with. Do it immediately, I'd said, and confirm by email. The second was to the property manager of Emily's apartment, which I technically owned. I asked him to deliver a notice of ownership transfer after the wedding. Nothing cruel, just paperwork. A reminder that love and entitlement were not the same thing. And the third, the most delicate, was to an old business contact of my late husband's, a man named Daniel Crane. He'd once mentioned he was wary of Jason's startup, the one Emily bragged about endlessly. If you're still considering investing, I told him, you might want to hold off. "There's something you should see." Daniel had thanked me, asked for details, and within an hour I'd forwarded him every questionable document Jason had ever bragged about over dinner, his financial vision, his family trust, all riddled with inconsistencies. I hadn't realized until then how much Jason had revealed in his arrogance, and how carefully I'd listened over the years, even when I pretended not to. So as I sat there on that beach, my hands folded neatly in my lap, I wasn't a victim. I was the tide returning. The ceremony went by in a blur. Vows, tears, applause. They kissed under the archway while gulls circled above, white confetti raining down. Jason raised Emily's hand triumphantly like a trophy. I clapped politely. Afterward came cocktails, laughter, and speeches. Guests toasted the power couple. Jason thanked everyone with polished humor. Emily laughed too loudly, smiled too wide. I could see it all now, how the performance mattered more to them than the promise. Linda nudged me during the reception. "You're awfully quiet for a mother of the bride." I smiled faintly. "Just listening." "To what?" "The waves," I said. As the sun began to dip, Jason took the microphone again. "Before dinner," he announced, "I want to share a surprise. Emily and I have made a bold move, one that will change everything for our future." I felt my stomach tighten. He continued, "We've expanded our business venture, and thanks to new funding, we'll be relocating to San Francisco right after the honeymoon." The guests cheered. Cameras flashed. Linda leaned toward me. "Did you know about this?" I shook my head. "No, but I think they're about to find out they celebrated too early." Because even as he spoke, I saw the flicker of confusion on Jason's face when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The quick glance down, the tightening jaw, then another buzz, and another. Emily noticed too. "What is it?" she whispered. He forced a smile, slipping the phone away. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I could tell by the way his hand trembled slightly around the microphone, by the way his laughter came half a second too late. Somewhere, an investor had just pulled out. Somewhere, a number had gone to zero. And somewhere, deep inside, I felt the first ripple of justice. As twilight painted the sky lavender, dinner was served. I stayed quiet, eating little, smiling when spoken to. I watched Emily flit from table to table, radiant but restless. She kept glancing toward Jason, who was pale now, distracted, his charm wearing thin. Linda caught me watching him. "You know something, don't you?" she whispered. I met her gaze and smiled softly. "Let's just say the tide's higher than it looks." She frowned, puzzled. "You're scaring me, Ruth." "Don't be scared," I said. "It's just nature. What goes out always comes back in." When the toasts began, the air had changed. Jason kept checking his phone. Emily's laughter came brittle. I lifted my champagne glass, studying the bubbles rise and burst. Each one a tiny, perfect ending. And as I watched them, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was loud. What I felt was quiet, a deep, steady peace born from truth. Tomorrow everything would shift, but tonight I'd let the tide keep its rhythm. And when Jason stood to give his final toast, I knew the storm was ready. The sky had turned the color of spilled wine when Jason stood to make his final toast. The torches flickered in the wind, throwing gold across the white tablecloths. Laughter drifted from every corner of the reception, though I could feel the unease running underneath, like an undercurrent before the rip. He raised his glass. "To love," he declared, "to new beginnings, and to family, because without family, there's no foundation." A few guests cheered. Cameras flashed. Emily beamed beside him, the picture of triumph. He went on, voice smooth as oil. "We wouldn't be here without generosity, especially from the woman who taught Emily everything about strength and sacrifice." He turned to me, smiling like a predator wrapped in silk. Ruth called her everyone, the most supportive mother-in-law a man could ask for. The crowd applauded. A spotlight, literal or imagined, fell on me. He lifted his glass higher. "And now that we're entering a new phase, our business expansion, our move west, we're thrilled to announce that thanks to some generous support, everything is in place. We're officially funded." A murmur of admiration swept the tables. I rose slowly, feeling the sand shift beneath my heels. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady but soft. "If I could add something to that toast." The chatter quieted. Jason hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Of course, Mrs. Calder, please." I took the microphone from his hand. It was warm, slick with sweat. "Thank you, Jason." I turned to the guests, smiling pleasantly. "You've all been so kind today, celebrating my daughter's marriage. It's been unforgettable." Laughter rippled politely. But before we move forward, I continued, I'd like to clarify a few details, since details, as we know, make or break a foundation. Emily's smile faltered. Mom, what are you doing? Just speaking truth, darling. I turned back to the crowd. Earlier today, Jason approached me with a request. No, an ultimatum. $50,000 for what he called a luxury expansion. When I declined, my daughter suggested I might enjoy a nursing home alone instead. A collective gasp cut through the night. Someone dropped a fork. Jason barked a laugh. She's joking. I never joke about money, I said. My tone wasn't sharp, it was even factual, especially when it involves fraud. He blinked. Excuse me? I gestured toward the projector screen behind him, the one looping their engagement photos. If you could, darling, I told the technician softly, switch to the file labeled Investors Deck. The screen flickered. Numbers, charts, and signatures appeared, then red flags, highlighted notes, inconsistencies. The guests leaned forward, murmuring. These, I explained, are excerpts from Jason's investment proposal for his company. You might recognize some of your own names among the potential investors. Daniel Crane, for example, he's been kind enough to verify that these documents were creative, shall we say. Jason went white. How did you missed one detail, I said quietly, turning to him. The assets you bragged about, trusts, accounts, collateral, are all under my name. The same accounts you assumed my daughter controlled. A low wave of whispers rippled through the tables. Flashbulbs popped. I've revoked every access privilege, I continued. Effective this afternoon, the properties you boasted of, retitled. The co-signed apartment, transferred. The line of credit, frozen. Emily stood, trembling. Mom, stop. Please, you're embarrassing me. No, sweetheart, I said gently. You embarrassed yourself when you put a price on love. Jason lunged for the microphone. This is slander. I stepped back, letting him grab at the air. Truth doesn't slander, I replied. But you may want to call your investors before dessert. Phones began buzzing around the room. Guests checking messages, emails lighting up with alerts. Someone gasped, "Oh my God, it's true!" Jason turned to Emily, panicked. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head violently, tears spilling over. "I thought you said she'd already transferred it." And just like that, the mask slipped. The perfect couple cracked open in front of everyone. Linda rose beside me, whispering, "Ruth, are you sure?" "Yes," I said, "completely." Security moved discreetly toward the commotion. Jason cursed under his breath, pushing past the officiant, grabbing at Emily's arm. "We're leaving!" "Jason!" she cried, but he was already striding toward the exit, cell phone pressed to his ear, shouting into the wind. Emily turned back to me, face blotched with fury and shame. "How could you do this? You've ruined everything!" I met her eyes. "No, darling, I stopped you from ruining yourself." She froze, shaking, then ran after him, veil tearing loose, scattering petals in the sand. For a long moment, the only sound was the sea, then applause, soft at first, then growing, hesitant but sincere. Someone whispered, "She's incredible." I didn't bow, didn't gloat. I simply set the microphone down and walked away. Each step felt lighter. Each breath tasted of salt and freedom. At the edge of the beach, I slipped off my shoes. The sand was cool now, the horizon bruised purple. I could still hear Emily crying somewhere behind me, Jason shouting into the night. But I didn't turn back, because sometimes the storm doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it clears the air so you can finally breathe. The morning after the wedding, the beach looked like a battlefield of beauty champagne corks half buried in the sand, wilted flowers tangled in seaweed, chairs knocked over by the wind. I walked barefoot along the shore, the hem of my dress still faintly smelling of smoke from the torches. Seagulls screamed overhead, indifferent to what had happened here last night. The chaos had dissolved, but the echo of it clung to the air, the gasps, the whispers, the crashing sound of illusions shattering in real time. I'd slept for maybe an hour. Linda stayed in my hotel room just to make sure I didn't spiral. She'd poured me tea in the quiet hours before dawn and said, "You did what any mother with a backbone would have done." But I wasn't sure. I'd stared at the steam rising from my cup and whispered, "Did I save her or did I just lose her?" Linda sighed. "Sometimes you can't tell the difference until time passes." Now with the tide coming in, I let myself finally cry. Not for Jason, not for the lies, not for the money, but for Emily, my daughter. The one I'd taught to bake bread from scratch. The one who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares and ask if the stars ever fell into the sea. When did she start believing love was measured in zeros? When did she start seeing me as a wallet instead of a mother? I thought about the way she'd looked at me before running after Jason. Not angry, not even shocked, just betrayed that her game had ended too soon. A wave rolled up, cold and deliberate, washing over my toes. The sting felt like truth. Back at the hotel, I found a note slid under my door. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Emily's. The paper was wrinkled, the ink smudged in places. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I can't believe you do that to your own daughter. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Don't contact me. I sat on the bed for a long time holding that note. My chest ached, but I didn't crumble. I'd already done my crumbling years ago when her father died, when I'd worked double shifts to keep the house, when I'd watched her drift further from the girl I knew. This was different. This was a scar forming. Linda knocked softly. Breakfast? I shook my head. Not yet. I just need a moment. She nodded, leaving quietly. That afternoon, I got a call from Richard, my lawyer. It's done, he said. The transfers are finalized. Jason tried to access one of the frozen accounts this morning. I exhaled. And? He failed. Completely. Also, I received a statement from Daniel Crane. He's filing a formal investigation into Jason's company. Seems you were right to warn him. Thank you, Richard. There was a pause. You sound calm. I am, I said, surprised to hear the truth in my own voice. Exhausted but calm. Later that evening, I sat on the hotel balcony watching the horizon burn orange. The laughter of other guests drifted up from the pool strangers who had no idea a family had cracked open just a few feet away. I closed my eyes and thought of Emily again. I'd always believed motherhood was a story you could control if you loved enough, gave enough, tried enough. But life had a cruel way of teaching otherwise. Sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes it was the very thing that blinded you to the truth. Still, beneath the grief, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Not the triumphant kind, but the quiet, necessary kind. The kind that comes after a storm when the world is still damp and raw, but the air smells clean. I realized then that I didn't regret what I'd done. I regretted that it had come to this. 2 days later, I checked out. Linda hugged me tight, whispering, "You're stronger than most people could ever be." I smiled faintly. I don't feel strong. That's how you know you really are. As I loaded my suitcase into the cab, I glanced back at the beach one last time. Workers were dismantling the wedding arch, pulling the stakes out of the sand. The wind caught the last few petals, sending them tumbling out to sea. It looked almost beautiful, endings often do. On the flight home, I thought about Emily again, whether she was still with Jason, whether she'd come to see what I'd done not as cruelty, but as love in its toughest form. Maybe she'd hate me for a while, maybe forever, but maybe, just maybe, one day, when she faced her own heartbreak, she'd understand, and maybe then she'd call. I didn't cling to that hope. I just let it sit beside me like an old friend, quiet and uncertain, but still alive. As the plane rose above the clouds, the sun spilled across the wings like forgiveness. And I whispered to myself, I did what I had to do. For the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It's been 6 months since the wedding, 6 months since I stood on that beach, champagne glass trembling in my hand, and watched the illusion of family wash away. I've stopped replaying that night in my mind, the chaos, the gasps, the look on Emily's face. They used to visit me at 3 a.m., like ghosts that refused to rest. But now the memories come softly, like distant waves, audible, but no longer crashing. I sold the old house 2 months ago. It was too large, too filled with echoes. I bought a small cottage instead, not far from the cliffs outside Portland. From my kitchen window, I can see the sea every morning, a shifting gray mirror that reminds me how even the darkest waters reflect light if you stand at the right angle. It's quiet here, beautifully, almost defiantly quiet. I tend a small garden now, herbs, a few stubborn roses, a lemon tree that refuses to grow straight. I like the imperfection of it. There's something honest about crooked things that keep trying anyway. For weeks after the wedding, Emily didn't speak to me. No calls, no messages, just silence. I respected it. I didn't chase her. I'd spent too many years chasing, apologizing for truth that shouldn't have needed apology. Then one rainy morning in March, an envelope arrived. No return address, but I knew her handwriting instantly. My hands trembled as I opened it. Mom, I've been thinking about that night. I hated you for what you did. For a while I told myself you'd ruined my life. But Jason left 2 weeks later, took everything he could, and vanished. The investors are suing him now. I guess you saw what I couldn't. I'm not ready to say thank you yet, but I'm starting to understand. I hope you're okay, Emily. I read that letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something far rarer truth beginning to breathe again. A few weeks later, I got another envelope. This one contained a small photograph. Emily at a park bench. Hair windblown, eyes tired but softer somehow. On the back, she'd written, "Maybe we can talk soon." That single sentence felt heavier than any diamond ring she'd ever shown me. I placed the photo on my mantle, next to one of her as a child missing front teeth, frosting on her chin. The contrast was almost unbearable, but it was real. It was time itself, caught in 2 frames. My days have a rhythm now. Mornings with coffee by the window, afternoons writing in a journal I'd neglected for years. Sometimes I volunteer at a small community library in town, shelving books, reading stories to children whose laughter fills the rooms like sunlight. NT1. They remind me that beginnings are always hiding in endings. You just have to look down the right hallway. Linda visits often, bringing wine and gossip and the kind of laughter that makes your ribs ache. She still says, "You should write your story down one day," and maybe I will. But not yet. Right now, I'm still living it. Last week, I took a walk to the cliffs during sunset. The sea was calm, uncharacteristically still. The air smelled like salt and lilac. I stood there, watching the horizon bleed into gold, and thought about the woman I used to be, the one who smiled through disrespect, who mistook silence for peace, who loved her daughter so blindly she forgot to love herself. I'm not her anymore. That betrayal, that moment on the beach when Emily and Jason thought they could corner me, it broke something. Yes, but it also cleared space for something new to grow. I no longer measure my worth by who needs me or who doesn't. I measure it by the quiet in my own heart when I wake up, by the steadiness in my hands when I pour my morning tea. That's what peace feels like, not loud, not cinematic, just steady. Sometimes, at night, I imagine Emily knocking on my door. I imagine the way I'd open it, no grand speeches, no tears, just a small smile and the smell of rosemary from my garden. Maybe that day will come, maybe it won't. Either way, I'll be okay, because I've learned something I wish I'd known sooner. You can't control how people love you, but you can choose to stand where love doesn't cost you your soul. Tonight, as I write these words, the tide is coming in again. I can hear it through the open window, steady, relentless, forgiving. And as I watch the moon lay a silver path across the water, I whisper softly to myself, the same line that carried me through every storm. You missed one detail, not spoken in anger now, but in quiet triumph. Because the detail they missed, the one they'll never understand, is that I wasn't built to beg or break. I was built to begin again. And this, right here, is my beginning.